incredibly serious situation, an unprecedented moment for the country in an unprecedented crisis. Who's in charge now of the country?
Well, Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, is the first Secretary of State. He's the person who will be chairing all of the important meetings today. But you're absolutely right, Piers. I think that everyone's thoughts and prayers, as you've articulated and as Susanna has mentioned, are with the Prime Minister and his family at this time. We all desperately hope that he gets better, and we all recognise that the fact that the Prime Minister is in intensive care is a powerful, a sad reminder of the nature of this disease and the importance of us all pulling together in order to do everything that we can to fight it.
But it raises fundamental questions, which I think, as you're one of the most senior members of the government, we need to clarify. Obviously, everyone is rooting for Boris. I think that goes without saying. He's our Prime Minister. I don't care what your political persuasion. The guy's fighting for his life, and we're rooting for him to come through this. But because he's incapacitated, we need to know as a country who actually ultimately is going to make the big decisions. And one of them, for example, would be who would, if we had to order a nuclear strike from our nuclear defence system, who would do that now? If the Prime Minister is incapacitated, who is that person?
OK, let me try and answer that question. The first thing to say is that the person who's running the country, following the plan that the Prime Minister has set out, is Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary. So at all the important meetings today, there'll be one quite shortly, which will assess how we deal with the coronavirus crisis. The person who will be asking the tough questions, reviewing the evidence and marshalling the other ministers and the civil servants and the advisors to make sure we're working as one team, that will be Dominic Raab. He is the guy who's leading the effort. You ask about a nuclear strike. I'm not going to answer that question in the way that you want me to, for the following reason. When it comes to things like national security, we don't speculate about stuff like that. I know that you will think this is just another politician who's refusing to answer the question. Well, I am refusing to answer the question because there are established protocols that govern national security questions. We don't talk about them in a way which might give people who are our enemies any chance to...
Well, I mean, listen, I certainly don't want to argue with you on a morning like this. What I would say to that answer, though, is that actually under normal circumstances, it's quite clear that it's the Prime Minister. And in America, if the President, for example, was incapacitated, then the power would fall to the Vice President. It's a clear line of command. I think what may concern people here, I'm not imagining in a million years we're going to have to use our nuclear system, but it's there. And the Prime Minister of the country would normally be the person that uses it. And it just raises the question of who ultimately has power now in the country, particularly given that person may have to make gigantic decisions in the next few days and weeks.
Well, I hope I've been clear. Dominic Raab is in charge. We don't talk about national security matters.
OK, people's more immediate concern, Mr Gove, will be... firstly, obviously, personally, politically and nationally for the health of the Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
But they are also concerned, for all of those reasons, about lockdown. And their most immediate concern might be at what point may that be lifted? And if the Prime Minister is not in a position to make a decision about that, who makes that decision? We know that the health of the nation and the health of the economy are two very important factors that are balanced currently by the Prime Minister. Who will make that decision? And is it likely to be delayed, that decision, while he is in hospital?
No, it won't be delayed. It will be the case that we will take that decision collectively as a cabinet. The person who will chair that cabinet, the person who will make the final decision, of course, is, as I mentioned earlier, the Foreign Secretary. But I think it's important to recognise, lockdown is painful, it's difficult. It's particularly difficult if you're living in circumstances where you don't have easy access to green space, you maybe got children at home. I don't underestimate how difficult it is. But the Prime Minister's condition is a terrible and sad reminder of the fact that this disease spreads rapidly and has a virulence which is frightening. So that's one of the reasons we have this lockdown, so we can slow the spread of the disease and strengthen the NHS. So of course we want to move on. Lockdown is not a situation that anyone wants or relishes, but the reason we have it is to fight this disease.
Mr Gove, you know, you're close to the Prime Minister. He's in intensive care. That means he's obviously poorly, very poorly, and in absolute best care of our National Health Service. Do you know how he is doing this morning?
Yeah, he's being looked after by a top team. So, as I think you've been reporting, the Prime Minister was admitted to hospital on Sunday, underwent a series of tests. His condition deteriorated, sadly, yesterday afternoon, early evening. He was admitted to intensive care at 7 o'clock last night. An announcement was made at 8. And the Prime Minister is being cared for by an absolutely amazing team of doctors and nurses. And there'll be updates throughout the day from Number 10. But at the moment, there's nothing more that I can add than that.
There are a number of NHS staff losing their lives, doctors, consultants, surgeons, nurses, midwives. It's getting very dangerous for our NHS frontline people. So many complaints still, they don't feel adequately protected. Where are we in getting the right PPE to the right people, and not just on the front line, but to people working in pharmacies, in care homes, and everywhere else where they may come into regular contact with people who have the virus?
Well, you're right, Piers. Making sure that people have the right personal protective equipment is incredibly important. We're manufacturing some of that in the UK. We're getting more of it from abroad. We had significant stocks already for the front line. There were one or two problems getting stuff from the warehouses to the front line at the beginning, but the situation's improved. It is the case that if anyone on the NHS front line needs extra PPE, there is a 24/7 helpline. And over the course of the weekend, millions of gloves and aprons were distributed to the front line. You're also right that it's NHS and social care workers who must come first, but we also want to make sure that appropriate equipment is available for people working in pharmacies, for people working in prisons, for people working on the front line of local government. And last Thursday, we published guidance outlining the equipment that will be available or should be available to those in public service.
Is it fair to say, Mr Gove, and I say this with great respect, I mean this, but we've never been in this position before. Does anybody, even with all the information that you guys have there, does anybody really know how this is all going to play out? Or are we really just working from day to day and trying to get on top of things?
Well, the world is dealing with an unprecedented situation. And you're right, the nature of this virus, because it's new and dangerous and so easily spread, means that scientists are racing to develop an understanding of how it works. Now, the good news is that scientists are working across different national boundaries. Their knowledge of how it operates, the virus, is getting better every day. That means that in the UK and in other countries, we can develop a stronger response. And yes, we are responding day by day to the information that we get, but we're also thinking ahead, and we're thinking ahead to make sure that the NHS is in the strongest possible position. And we're also thinking ahead, as Susanna indicated earlier, to make sure that we can, at the appropriate moment, ease the restrictions and make sure that the life that we all want to lead, the normal life that we all want to lead, can come back.
I think we've all been knocked sideways by the fact that the Prime Minister has been brought down by the coronavirus. But we need to keep, don't we, our eyes on some of the things which are going to help. For instance, we've talked a lot about testing. And the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who himself has recovered from coronavirus, has promised 100,000 tests a day by the end of this month. But at the same time, we know that the antibody test, which the Prime Minister himself said would be a game changer and which so many people had a lot of hope in, we currently do not have, despite the orders, a reliable antibody test. What reassurance can you give us about where we are with testing? And also, Mr Gove, what reassurance can you give people who might be feeling wobbly right now because the person in charge is extremely sick in intensive care and they want to know decisions continue to be made and there's a firm hand on the tiller?
Well, two important points there. On testing, the Health Secretary outlined a 5-point plan last week, which involves not just antibody but antigen testing to see whether people have the virus at the moment, as well as looking to see how we can develop the test that tells if people have developed the antibodies that mean that they're resilient and immune. And it's also the case that in that plan, we're bringing together the great drugs companies, the great life science companies in the UK that we have in order to make sure that we increase what's called our diagnostic capacity. And the Health Secretary is driving that relentlessly. Testing is critically important, but there are other things as well that we're doing in the NHS to strengthen its resilience, increasing the number of ventilators that we have, increasing the capacity to provide oxygen, and also undergoing or taking clinical trials for new treatments that might also help people deal with what is a new disease. On the other part about a firm hand on the tiller, as I mentioned earlier, Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, will be chairing Cabinet Committee meetings. There'll be one at 9:15 today, which will review the evidence in the fight against the disease, and then there'll be meetings later in the day. Matt Hancock will chair one that deals with the NHS's response. Rishi Sunak will chair one that deals with the economic response, and there'll also be a meeting looking at the whole public sector and discussing some of the issues that Piers has just mentioned about making sure that PPE is there for people, not just in the NHS, but beyond it.